Welcome to the Boston chapter meeting. And for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Kurt Blumenau. I am one quarter of the leadership bullpen that's working to set up meetings and kind of lead the chapter. The other members being John DeFonso, Greg Tranter, and Bill Nowlin. And we're glad to be of service and trying to make some things happen. A couple events to mention before we get cooking. First one comes from the SABR National Office, and you may have seen it, which was all SABR members are invited to attend a preview and extended trailer of the upcoming film My Father, Dick Allen, and Q&A with Richard Allen Jr. and director Andy Billman, Sunday, September 21st at the Boston Film Festival. Festival is offering complimentary tickets. The screening will be held at the Emerson Paramount Theater in downtown Boston. 5-minute extended trailer will be followed by a Q&A with the director and Richard Allen Jr. Please RSVP to Sharon Panozzo, and I'll probably put her email in the chat. All you folks got this email from National, but just in case, maybe I'll probably duck into the chat and put her email in there. For more details, if you're interested in attending. And second, the Boston chapter has also planned a Zoom social on Monday, September 22nd. That one's at 8 p.m. rather than the 7 p.m. that this one is. We actually booked it, I think, the day before Roman Anthony went down. We were all hopped up about the Red Sox postseason race, and we booked our Zoom social. But they're still making a race of it. I don't mean to be too fatalistic. But at any rate, we will get together at 8 p.m. on September 22nd and just kind of talk about how the Sox are doing and maybe get around to the rest of the teams as well. And we have sent out the Zoom link for that. I'm sure we'll do it at least once before the event arrives, and maybe I'll put that in the chat as well once we're up and rolling. What else? And we're hoping to work on some more in-person events for the fall and the winter, and we will announce those when we have something more firm. And I think that wraps up the official business. So I think we'll move into the featured presentation. Babe Ruth and his 1935 season with the Braves. I think we all know that although there were many kind of bright spots in Babe Ruth's baseball history, this was perhaps one of the less celebrated moments when he came back to town for one last partial season as a player. And our speakers, as you know, will be first Bob LeMoine, author of, correct me if I get this wrong, Bob, When the Babe Went Back to Boston.
That's the beginning of it, yes.
Yeah, that's the abridged version. That's the Cliff's Notes title. As in I believe member of the Boston Braves Historical Society.
Yeah.
And very much enjoying your background. That's where I graduated from college. It looked a little different then.
Yeah.
And also Matthew Glidden, who has spoken to SABR meetings on baseball cards, and we'll discuss the Babe from that viewpoint. So I think the what we just settled on for Q&A was if you have Q&A, raise your hand and we can ask as we go. But if Bob gets a bunch of them, we may push some off because we don't want to hold up Matt. We want to get to both ends of the presentation. So I think we'll start with it open, and if there's an upsurge, maybe we'll kind of hold some back, and if we need to do that. So I think with that, I will turn it over to Bob, who should be able to share the screen and put up his slides.
Yep.
And we'll go from there.
Yeah. Everybody got that?
Looks
Good?
great.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, this adventure of me looking at Babe Ruth, I always wanted to know more of the story of how all this happened, of him coming back to the Braves in 1935. And so what I'm doing tonight, since we're looking at Ruth 90 years ago, look at this as if it were a scrapbook. I've gone through and I've clipped pictures and headlines from the papers of the day, just to walk through from August of 34, where Ruth first announces that he's done. all the way to June of 35 when he quits the Braves. And so that's basically what I'm doing here tonight. Because what else are you going to say about a 38 and 115 team, except it had Babe Ruth? So we look at, hold on a second here. Okay. In August of 34, Ruth does announce that he would like to become a manager. He's talked about managing for a couple of years anyway, had perhaps some opportunities back in 32. But he thinks if I'm a manager, then I can go ahead and do a little pinch hitting on Saturdays and Sundays when it would be a good time to pinch hit, time for the crowd and things like that. But basically, everybody is assuming that Ruth is done and he is finishing up his career. So on the heels of that, he's in Boston at that time. And Fenway Park has the largest crowd to that date of over 46,000 that come to say goodbye to him. And crowds are everywhere. Lots of people are left outside Fenway wanting to get in. And it was quite a day, quite a memorable day of Ruth in Boston. Here's another image because they had people on the field roped off. I guess that's the only way they could have fit in 46,000 at the time without the monster seats. But Paul Shannon of the Boston Post, I think, made a good comment here. A farewell tribute to baseball's idol. Who else, upon such a cold and gloomy day with showers imminent at all times, could have packed these ample stands and drawn to the Fenway such a cheering, enthusiastic assemblage? So a big day. And Ruth remembered that because he talked about Boston always being one of the places that he loved coming to the most. Well, it was very much different when he actually plays his last game at Yankee Stadium. There were only 2,000 fans, even though it was known that this was most likely Ruth's last. Only 2,000 fans showed up for that game. And the John Drebinger's piece here really symbolizes where Ruth is at this point, still limping painfully. Started in right field, caught one fly from which he scarcely had to move, drew a base on balls as he came to bat in the first inning, hobbled to first, and called for a runner. He was a liability in the outfield. He could not get around very well. He had only hit 22 home runs that year, and the lowest that he had since the days when he was a pitcher. So here we go. Yankee Stadium, you would expect a big crowd, but no, it didn't happen. What did happen was, as we get into October, he plays what is thought to be his final game playing in Washington, and they do bring out a gift for him. And Shirley Povich there talks about this is marking the end of the trail, and the King of Diamonds tells his appreciation of admiration and Ruth's final game. So they thought. And as we go on here into the winter, there's all kinds of rumors that are going on. Yes, they thought Ruth might come back to the Red Sox to be manager. They were unhappy with Bucky Harris. And Ruth is a possible solution there. So the rumor was. Tom Yawkey really is not interested in that at all. In Washington, it was also rumored that Clark Griffith was going to bring him in, but that's not really a possibility there as well. And that eventually led to the trade to bring Joe Cronin to the Red Sox. And so Washington has no real interest in him. And then the headline of Jacob Ruppert of the Yankees says that basically any team can have him for free if they want him. the biggest PR situation was, how do you get rid of Babe Ruth? How do you get rid of an icon, the most famous person on the planet at the time? Rupert wanted to look at this as, we will give him away for free to allow him to have a great opportunity around the corner. Now, they had offered him, maybe you want to manage the Newark minor league team. Ruth says, I'm no minor leaguer. And different rumors about going different places, but none of that ever came to be. Now, they were going on this trip to Japan, which started in Honolulu. He's going with those all-stars that go over there to Japan. And they think that this is really an opportunity for him to show his managerial skills, because Connie Mack was going to let him manage this group of all-stars. And that was a thought that Connie Mack was getting old at that time in 1935, and he was going to be getting out soon. Little did they know. And so there we go. There's some opportunities there for Ruth that have kind of gone by the wayside. Now, let's bring in Judge Fuchs, and the owner of the Braves, or at least the president of the Braves. Born in Germany in 1878, his family came to New York City in 1883. His father was a chemist. He grew up mainly on the Lower East Side. He got a law degree from NYU, becomes a Manhattan attorney for about 20 years, part of that time serving as a magistrate. And that is where he gets the nickname, the Judge. He's close friends with John McGraw. The two of them socialize in New York on occasion. And of course, McGraw knows everybody. And at a social gathering, he brings up the fact that the Braves are for sale and you, Judge, should buy them. And the judge says, well, I'm only going to do that if you can get Christy Mathewson to come out of retirement and help me and basically be the baseball person to run the team. And so they convince Matty, who is now upstate New York trying to get air because he's suffering from lung problems from World War I and dealing with the fatal gas. And he's not going to live very much longer. And the doctors actually say, if you take on this job, it's probably going to shorten your life. But that was Matty. He would rather put himself into the game. And so Judge purchases the Braves in 1923. And it would take about a decade before they actually had a winning club. There was a lot of bad years there in the 1920s, both Braves and Red Sox. And Matty, of course, passes away in 1925, and so the Judge becomes the president of the club. And along comes Charles Francis Adams, probably one of the most prominent sports people in Boston history that we often do not think of. The Boston Globe even called him the #1 Boston sports promoter at the time. But Adams, they called him CF, so he wasn't to be confused with another Boston, Charles Francis Adams, who had his line in the Adams family of Boston. But CF was born in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, 1876. He goes on to business school. He works for his uncle in the grocery business, and then he meets up with John T. Connor, who owned a chain of Brookside stores, grocery chain. So he works for him. He becomes president of the company and brings it from about 125 stores to 600 by 1925, known as First National Stores. And I'm sure a number of you are familiar with that chain that lasted until the late 70s. By 1935, he's got 2,700 stores, and he is known for his ingenuity, his business acumen, and so he's also made a lot of money. And because of his love for sports, he pours money into what he loves. He founded the Boston Bruins. He purchased the entire Western Hockey League because the Bruins didn't have enough talent. And he said, I might as well buy the whole league so I can get people like Ernie Shore. Not only that, he was a key financier of the Boston Garden because the Bruins playing at Boston Arena was too limited, needed a new arena. So he put down oodles of money to help finance the Boston Garden. And then he spent about $2.5 million creating Suffolk Downs. So he was into the Bruins, he was into the Boston Garden, he was into racing, and becomes vice president under Fuchs when Fuchs has financial problems with an investor that bows out. Adams gave him $200,000 in cash to get him through a difficult time. And the two had a very strong, good relationship, I think, early on. But over time, it becomes a problem. The judge is not making any money with the Braves. So, in addition to Adams giving the $200,000, the judge had also accumulated $189,000 in debt from Stoneham and Breeden, the New York Giant and St. Louis Cardinal owners. He borrowed money from them, and because of that, the National League said, well, we're going to keep all that stock in collateral because we can't have an owner owning money to another owner. So Adams just went through and bought that out. I'll just pay for that $189,000 loan. And he made other various loans to Fuchs to help bail him out. So in 1932, Adams is frustrated because Fuchs is not able to pay back much of this. Well, he did pay back some, but he wasn't able to pay off the entire loan. So Adams is now stuck with all this money he's invested, saying that I'm not all the way in on this and I'm not all the way out. He has no interest in running. He's got all these other sports adventures that he's not interested in the Braves. But in 1932, he announces that he is in control of the club because he has all of Fuchs' stock in the club as collateral. And so he is saying that $588,000 is what it would take to buy him out. Anybody can purchase the club for that. Well, there were some offers, some possibilities for getting themselves out of this debt. Massachusetts had just passed betting on horses and dogs, and Adams, knowing the racing circuit, applies for a license to race dogs with the idea of they'll put the dog track at Braves Field and they'll run at night. They'll put up temporary lights and run dogs there. So that would bring in revenue for the club. And at the same time, Babe Ruth is getting offers from teams such as the House of David, the bearded team, not a lot of serious offers. And Fuchs is already putting down rumors that he is interested in bringing Ruth in. This is a continual thing throughout November and December. And as we get into December, the National League, well, the baseball winter meetings are taking place, and the dog racing issue is becoming a big topic. Judge Landis already says, if they're going to do that, I'm going to quit. I'm out. Because we know Landis and the whole gambling thing from the 1919 World Series. It creates such a negative publicity. Bill Cunningham in the Boston Post gives his anti-racing articles talking about all the connections to con men and Al Capones of the world and things like that. So it's such a negative thing that by the time the National League meetings come along, Fuchs says, I'm not even going to go there. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to embarrass the game at all. And so our idea is gone. So at the same time is the rumors about Babe Ruth. And you can see the Globe and the Herald conflicting articles here. Adams denies seeking Ruth, and Adams admits seeking Ruth in an interview. He actually did meet with Jacob Ruppert at the meetings, just to see what's possibly happening. Because if we can't run dogs, where else are we going to get revenue for this team? As you can see on the right, they lost $150,000 in 1934 alone. And so there's the issues there is how are we going to bring in revenue? Yeah, Ruth just might do it. And by the time we get to 1935, the um, the Boston Kennel Club has applied for a license to race dogs. Now, at the time, the Braves own back rent on Braves Field. It was owned by Commonwealth Realty, which is the estate taking over for James Gaffney, who was the one-time Braves owner who got Braves Field built. And so the Commonwealth Realty is saying, hey, wait a minute, the Braves are behind in rent. The promise of dogs coming in and generating revenue because, racing craze is on. That's a good idea. So we're going to terminate the Braves lease. Well, this sent the National League, of course, into a frenzy. And you can imagine Braves fans opening the paper there in that January of the Braves don't have a place to play. So Ford Frick, National League president, is calling for a meeting to discuss how are we going to do this. Maybe the Braves play their entire season on the road. Of course, one option is, hey, let's ask Tom Yawkey if we can use Fenway Park. And the answer was no. We're not gonna allow that to happen. This is no emergency, and we're not willing to do that. And then Ruth is after the Japan trip. Ruth is on his world cruise. He's over in Paris. He's getting anxious to get back home because this article here is really cool. The Babe said it seems strange to walk all day in a city without anyone recognizing him. He's used to lively attention from waiters, but those in Paris don't give him a tumble. They never heard of him or baseball either. So Ruth is really having trouble because he knows there's not really a job for him back home. So what is going to happen? Well, the league steps in and basically saves the Braves of their financial mess. They pay off the back rent to the Commonwealth Realty, and now the Braves owe the National League money. So they come up with a payment plan for the Braves to try to get out of their financial mess. And of course, Fuchs agreeing that, oh, we're not going to talk about dogs anymore. We're not going to do anything like that. So in this January meeting, they pretty much set that the league can't go on without the Braves. It just can't happen. It's a drain on the entire league. They have a meeting in February, and so the National League officially takes over the Braves lease until 1946, and the Braves are now subletting Braves Field. So that leads to Fuchs coming up with a plan on how to make the Braves sustainable, and he comes up with an advanced ticket purchasing plan because this team did not even have enough money to get to spring training or to even get the season underway. So advanced ticket sales, you buy a book of tickets, that generates money early on, and so the Boston Braves Citizen Committee really helped put all that together under Fuchs' leadership. And that was enough to give the league confidence in Fuchs to say, okay, you've been through hard times, but we have confidence in you to run the team from this point on. And so opening day would be known as Judge Fuchs Day to honor his commitments to trying to keep the franchise afloat through thick and thin. So then we get into February, and yes, the rumors are true. Ruth has been talking to Fuchs. He's been talking to Adams. And he is indeed in a deal with Rupert, where Rupert would place him on waivers. And basically, the Braves would just get him for a minuscule amount. and then give him a salary. It's somewhere between 30 and 40,000. The accounts differ on that. But what is Ruth there to do is the issue, because he has three titles. He's still a player. He is an assistant manager to Bill McKechnie, and he's also a second vice president. And someone asked, what is a second vice president? And the answer was, it's somebody who writes checks. So there was really no plan here on what was going on. And there's Gene Mack's cartoon version of Ruth coming home. The expectations were high in that this would get the Braves out of their doldrums. Now you can see that there was already a misunderstanding of Ruth's role. I don't have time to read it, but I have included in the book the entire letter from Fuchs to Ruth, which basically says that if we believe it's in the best interest of you and the club, perhaps there is a possibility that you would succeed Bill McKechnie as manager in 1936, and we would promote McKechnie to the front office. To which McKechnie said, what would I do in an office? He was a baseball guy. He wasn't an administrator by any means. However, as you can see here, Ruth was under the impression, hey, it's a done deal. I'm going to be managing in 1936 and so forth. So they have a big deal with Ruth coming back to Boston, and they sign the paperwork, and crowds are everywhere welcoming Ruth home, thinking that this is the savior of the franchise. And now we move to March, and we're in St. Petersburg. I just love this picture of the crowds gathering around Ruth as he got there in St. Petersburg for spring training. And he goofs around with Robert Moranville. There's a picture there of him taking his cuts there early on. They didn't have a shirt for him yet. And him talking with McKechnie. And it brought out big crowds in spring training. And even the fact that they thought perhaps Ruth could be made into a first baseman because Buck Jordan was holding out. And so Ruth played some games at first, although he never did do that in an actual game. And then in April, Ruth comes back. He's in Boston. And to the delight of everybody and the expectations of everybody, he hits a home run on opening day. And all this talk of him being beaten down in second hand. Nope, this is brand new Ruth. He's going to lead us to better things. And there is the plaque that was given to Judge Fuchs on the opening day, which was also Judge Fuchs Day, to thank him for the work that he had done in saving the franchise. But that was really the best highlight of the early season, because by May, you can see Bill Corum's article here, Babe Ruth very tired and disappointed considering leaving the Boston team. He was only batting 155 at the time. And Marvin McCarthy here mentions that, where is it here? Ruth could not catch the ball if it floated gently out of the heavens into his outfield, stayed and supported by a parachute. Let's see, it says he could not hit a home run if somebody strung the ball like a Halloween apple and left it hanging over home plate. He was fighting a cold all the time and complaining of aches and pains, and this was certainly not the Ruth of old. But one last hurrah. You probably all are familiar with his 3 home runs in Pittsburgh, the last one clearing the roof of Forbes Field and the mythology built around that. Now, at this point, Christy Walsh, his agent, and his wife Claire are saying, this is a great time to go. Just retire now. But Fuchs had talked retirement with Fuchs earlier in the month, and Fuchs said, well, we really could use the income from this Western swing, because they had planned events for him in Philly. and in St. Louis. And so Ruth basically says, I promised that SOB Fuchs that I would carry on through. The relationship has deteriorated much to this point, not only because Ruth physically just can't play much anymore, but also Fuchs expected all kinds of PR appearances and things that Ruth just was not willing to do. So there was a problem in the relationship very early on. And here's another, this is the Pittsburgh Press just noting his 3 home runs there and what a big deal that was. But we move ahead to June, and Ruth is released by the Braves. He actually asked for permission to go see the SS Normandy, which was docking in New York Harbor, was breaking a speed record. And anybody who was there was, big attraction. And Ruth wanted to go, and Fuchs is pretty well tired of the Babe at this point and says, no, you can't go. And so Ruth then decides, and he pulls his teammates together on the morning of June 2nd and says, I'm going to go on the retirement list because I'm not doing this anymore. And what must have been an incredible scene, all the players gather around him for an autograph on the way out the door. And then he calls a press conference during that game. He still thinks he's going to play again. And just not willing to give up and realize the reality here. But he wasn't going to come back as long as Fuchs was in charge of the Braves. And in what must have been an interesting scene, if you can imagine, outside the Miles Standish Hotel out in Kenmore Square, is Babe Ruth packing up his car for the last time to head on out, and Bill McKechnie comes by to say good wishes to him. And that was the only person from the Braves to do that. That was where we were at that point. So here we wrap up. What happened at that point? Fuchs decides to finally resign by August 1st because Adams is holding all the cards and Fuchs just can't, he doesn't have the financial means to even pull himself out of this. The Braves finished 38-115. There is now a reorganization that is going on because the team is considered a forfeited franchise. So the National League is now taking over, mainly because they knew Charles Adams had all the money in the stock, but because of his ties to racing and gambling, they did not want him to have anything to do with day-to-day operations. And so after a couple of months, Bob Quinn, former Red Sox owner, and who is now in Brooklyn, agrees to take on all the debt that this team had and work out a 10-year plan to repay Adams. And Adams actually lost $250,000, but because of Quinn taking over, he was able to be repaid by 1940 because Quinn builds a syndicate, including Perini and company, those that would eventually move the team to Milwaukee. But in 1940, Adams finally gets his money. And my book will continue with where does Ruth go beyond this? His depression, his not feeling wanted anymore, trying to figure out what he does after baseball, and it follows him to the rest of his life. But I'll leave it right there because we're just talking about 90 years ago. So I think that's all I've got.
Can I ask a quick question, maybe while Matthew's getting set up?
Please do.
I know there was one anecdote in there that gives me maybe some idea, but did you know much about the relationship between Ruth and McKechnie? I mean, it seems like McKechnie was saddled with this lousy team and this
Yeah.
special case and probably a front office and did Ruth and McKechnie get along, and kind of what was McKechnie's role in the whole, how
They
did he manage the whole thing?
Ruth always spoke very highly of McKechnie. But there was a point where McKechnie was convincing Fuchs that Ruth needed to go because his pitchers were complaining about how bad he was in the outfield. and he couldn't play out there. And Fuchs is seeing money going down the drain because that was his whole hope there. And but as far as personally, I never um, see anybody having a bad thing to say about Bill McKechnie. He was, I believe, quite a good human being, person that everybody got along with.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm ready to pick up. I see we have about
Thank you.
20 plus minutes left. Let's see. Let's go with that right there. How is everyone seeing? Are they seeing Finding the Most Boston Babe Ruth card in their screens?
Yeah.
Great. So I write a lot about cards. Cards of all eras, cards of all teams, cards of all players. Ruth is one of the most important in terms of how cards are understood. You even said during your presentation one of the important names that a lot of people don't know, and that's Christy Walsh. Christy Walsh ended up negotiating many of the deals for Ruth, for Gehrig, for a wide variety of other clients that impact to a large extent how we see cards today and what kind of function they have in terms of fandom, what they're sold with, how they're distributed, and so on. I'll touch on a few of those things during this, but really the key is, as you might guess from the 4 cards you see here, is what is Ruth as a Boston card guy? If we want to just at the highest possible level say we're looking for the most Boston card we can of Babe Ruth, because he had a lot produced in his day, what would that look like? You've got 3 on here as a Red Sox player from different eras. You've got 1 as a Yankee that was then redone as a Braves player, purely for the sake of efficiency. And I'll cover each of these as I go through for the next 15 minutes or so. To quote Carl Sagan, as most people do in baseball, circumstances, if you wish to make a baseball card of Babe Ruth, you must first invent the universe. So that's what we're thinking of. We need Boston, we need baseball, we need Babe Ruth put all together. The most Boston card would be something that shows him in the local garb, to show something that is made in the local area and something that is available to local fans. Because he entered the major leagues when he did, he just missed being included in this seminal Cracker Jack set, 1914, 1915. So this image you see here is a creation that went along with a nice article I've linked by Ron Cassie. It's out of the Baltimore area. So this is also a hint at one of the 3 major areas. Boston is one of 3 major cities and franchises that claim Babe Ruth is one of their guys. Right from that era, there's a 1970 card. Looks good. It's got Babe Ruth on it. He's a Red Sox guy. It's the Boston store. Except the hitch there is that the Boston store is not in Boston. The Boston store is in Chicago. The Boston store, in fact, operated for quite a while, well past World War II, as it happened. Sold a lot of athletic wear, sold a lot of other things, major department store. It is very easy to reach what its building was. If you go downtown and you see the Bean and you see Millennium Park, get off anywhere along that major commercial district, you can walk right over to where it was. But the Boston store was linked to this via a Chicago publisher named Felix Mendelssohn. He had a photo studio and a print organization, and that photo studio and print organization collected a wide number, hundreds as it turns out, a wide number of players from that time, player photos. He put out these stately fronts, these really pretty well organized set as far as that goes. And then he sold the branding on the back of the card to a variety of stores, to publications, and to others who wanted to get their name out there and attach them to Major League Baseball. So unfortunately, while it shows Ruth as a Red Sox guy, you're looking at something that was distributed primarily with Chicago in mind, because they wanted people to go downtown to the Boston store. They wanted to pick up some sports apparel for their kids. So how about this one? Oh, hold on, there we go. This one, you've got Morehouse Baking Company. They operate out of Lawrence, much closer, much closer. There's a nice photo there of the guys looking extremely neat and clean in their Morehouse Baking, and also the adjacent building there, Sunlight Baking, which you can see is the promotion that's on the back of the card. Is if you get enough of these cards, bring them in person, we'll confirm that that's actually what you have in your hand, and then we'll give you either a baseball and bat or a jump rope. I think what this is telling you is not so much about the baseball part of it, but more how do we understand the way that kids of that era also have some kind of commercial role to play? Is it that the kids will demand the food that the parents buy, and then we get a nice circle of that going? Is it more about the parents collect stuff for the kids, and then the kids are pleased by it? It really was a wide open marketing arena to go through. You can look at this on the baseball side. You can look at this on the candy side. You can look at this on the history of Lucky Strike cigarettes, who famously declared that the color green was going to be fashionable again because they would pay everyone who wrote about fashion to declare that the color green was fashionable again, and therefore green would become fashion. There is so much open for interpretation, open for influence in that era, that the fact that you have Babe Ruth as a Red Sox pitcher on the front, and then it connects to a nice local Greater Boston business on the back, still can't mask the fact this is still a Felix Mendelssohn studio product. This is, again, taking one of those great Boston photos. It's creating a set of up to 200, and it happens to have Ruth in it. Now, this is you would spend far less for a calcified brick of Sunlight 10-cent bread from that era than you would on this Ruth card. This Ruth card is going to run you well into the 5 figures, probably into the 6 figures at this point in time. So since we're still looking at a made in Chicago product, we're going to keep going. Here's a couple nice shots. I showed a bit of one of these earlier. These are little panel cards that came in packages of paper toys. And within the industry, they call these penny paper toys. They could be all kinds of things. They could be glasses that you put in front of your eyes as a kid. They could be small booklets that told you stories. They could be collectible cards of Hollywood people, boxers, baseball. Those tended to be the 3 that were at the top of the list, was Hollywood, baseball, and boxing, with occasional other bits that really were only expected to last an extremely short amount of time. If you had a paper toy today, you would still have to try very, very hard to keep it intact. You know, if you've got a concert ticket that's printed on paper, you really have to put it somewhere to avoid it getting folded, to avoid it getting rolled over by, you know, a wheel of your office chair, to pick a random example of something that's happened to me many, many, many times. So the same thing here. These are true ephemera. They show Ruth. He's a big star. They show him astride these other groups here that are also big stars. But our challenge is we have them in the Red Sox uniform. They're available in Boston. Still, though, the company that makes these, Universal Toy and Novelty Company, they're based in Illinois. So we're not quite where we want to be. People who made these penny paper products could be in primarily Chicago or New York. Those are the 2 biggest locations for printing and publication. And the problem with looking at Boston era stuff is they tended to then become things that were tagged to the Yankees. And who wants that? Nobody wants that. Maybe not even the Yankee fans want that, but I can't pretend to know any Yankees fans. You have 2 examples right here of penny paper products that show Babe as a pitcher, Babe as a batter, but they were then adapted for the purposes of efficiency, for the purposes of distribution as Yankees. Even that one on the left there that shows him throwing calls him a Yanks pitcher, which, as it happens, he wasn't in 1920, but because he'd come off of all that success in Boston as their ace, when he did move on to the Yankees, it's not too much of a stretch to assume he was going to continue pitching in some capacity. Instead, of course, he became a star outfielder. He won any number of slugging titles, in pretty much however you measure it. So really, anything after 1920 is not going to call him a pitcher. You can still see the Boston roots that go into what's something that is nominally a New York product. So since we don't have a Boston team, we don't have it being made in the Boston area, we're going to keep going. They even, for purposes of, I mean, I call them cheap because, of course, I'm an expert. I can say they were cheap. But really, let's just say that for their desire to get as many things into fans' hands that showed what the player really was doing, that by the time you got into the middle of 1920, it was obvious Ruth wasn't a pitcher anymore. People didn't care so much whether he was able to catch fly balls on the outfield. They really wanted to know about his batting. So you're looking at 2 cards here, one on the right, using what is a projected image that was then artfully traced and redrawn to show him as a slugger. He's not shown as a lefty, but then what are you going to do? You had this original image that you were starting from in the first place. You did your best. You took him from his Boston pitching pose. You then put on some suggestive pinstripes. It's still made in Illinois because this is still the Universal Toy and Novelty Company producing this. Even if it's available in the Boston area, it's not meeting the stuff that we're looking for. Now, here in January 1933 is a key point that Ruth fits into, but really impacts all of card collecting. Prior to that era, and this is, again, hearkening back to what Bob mentioned, it was simply not possible for confectioners to legally sell a card with something else inside of a wrapper. You had to be able to predict, if you were selling something to a child, what the thing was the child was getting. There were a number of companies that were, and whether they're retail companies or distributors, who were taken to task and taken to the courtroom for saying that, okay, we're selling this thing, but maybe there's a bonus inside, and if only you buy this thing every 5 to 10 to 20 times, you'll get actually the penny back that you just spent on that gum. And the FTC said, that is not something we're going to put up with. We think that this is leading down a road where the kids who buy into this philosophy are going to turn into degenerates. And it legitimately was what they would put into the courtroom record, and what they were stating from their perspective was, there's no reason that we should have kids going and buying something that they don't know the outcome of, because we think that that's a road to moral turpitude. That also meant baseball cards simply could not be within a wrapper, could not be packaged with gum, because that meant that you were hoping to get Ruth when you unwrapped your card. But if instead you got in someone else that you didn't like quite so much, you had just, in your own mind, wasted most of the penny that you just, spent, even though you've got your mouth full of gum and maybe the gum tastes good for about 10 minutes. There is a strong reason here for the government to say, we don't think this is the right thing to do. Judges disagreed. This is the turning point in the bubblegum market. Everything that you see that you think of as a bubblegum card started in January 1933. The Federal Trade Commission is told, in fact, confectioners have to be able to do this. It is a restraint of fair trade if you don't do this. So the 1933 season is the beginning of a massive explosion in bubblegum cards. And Ruth happens to be there still relatively, it's not just that he's popular because he's one of the most photographed people in the world at this point. It's more that he is able to bring fans to a stadium, to a location, to a barnstorming team event, and he's able to deliver on what they expect. He's not shuffling around the outfield quite as slowly as he would in 35. He's not disappointing people and thinking, okay, maybe if we come back tomorrow, we'll see a different guy. This is still more or less the player they expect to see. And right here in Boston, the Gowdy Gum Company, based right along the Charles River, they take great advantage of that. They put up a ton of Ruth stuff into their sets that year, all different types. The one in the lower right corner, in fact, you're seeing a mailing envelope that had this really, really nice large Charles Conlon photo of him taking a swing. And in general, he's a feature presentation of that entire year, that it's very likely that Christy Walsh, his agent, realized from that point going forward that cards themselves, bubblegum cards, were going to be another way that Ruth was going to continue to make money, as well as the rest of his clients. The problem is we're still looking at a Yankee, and that's going to be an eternal problem for us, honestly. So let's move in and see what we can do for 1935. As has already been covered, the declining on-field skills and Ruth's own desire to have a more important role in baseball is key to what happens next. He does join the Braves. Here he is in Boston for the first time since 1919. And now you have, on the left, his arrival in spring training, March 9th, 1935. But for all of the, you'd think be the great combination of a major gum company operating out of Boston, a major star returning to Boston, they just picked up the same card, if I can show this there, the same card that was in the upper right, and they put his face on it and said, nope, he's a Brave now, pinstripes, doesn't matter. You're looking at that overlay, by the way, of a great Greg Kreindler painting. I think he took out the detail in a way that was important for me to include here, as opposed to just the original photo. But still, not very satisfying when all you're seeing is a Yankee that's slightly touched up. They removed the New York from the hat, and beyond that, you really have exactly the same look. So there's your problem. The one on the left there is not yet on a card. At long last, famously, of course, Boston Braves photos must include palm trees. Here's a great team photo of them during spring training in 1935. There's the whole team, and there's an inset that finally shows Babe Ruth. He's there pictured with all the different people, all the different hopeful Braves who haven't lost 115 games yet. It is produced in Boston by National Chicle. It is featuring Boston players in Boston uniform. It is available here in Boston. It's somewhat surprising that very few of these survive today, which implies somewhat that when kids went into the store and they picked these up as part of buying gum, buying cards, whatever it is they wanted most, not that many of them hung on to them. It could be simply that by the time that Ruth retired, they stopped distributing this particular photo. Out of all the ones that I have seen, and I've seen quite a few, I believe this is the only one that checks all of our boxes. It's got Babe as a Boston guy. It's made right here in the greater Boston area, and it's sold for people who are enthusiastic baseball fans. I have a trivia question for you. I hope everyone here can nail it, but it's who hit more home runs for the Boston Braves? Was it the Babe or was it Hank? Hank happens to be shown here in his minor league duds, but it's a good combo. It's got a very similar look to it. The answer is Babe had 6 and Hank had 0 because he did not debut for the Boston Braves. He debuted for Milwaukee. So whatever role you have in asking people sports questions when you go out to bars these days, this may be a one you can still win a drink on if you try hard enough. And there you go. There's a pretty standout photo of Ruth taking a photo of his own teammates around 1918. I'm open to any questions you may have about what you've seen either today or, of course, for Bob, anything else that's come up from his presentation.
I do have a question. No Diamond Stars card of Ruth in 35?
Let me jump back to that. It is likely that Christy Walsh made a point of after 1933. So in this set here, 1933, there's a lot of Ruth, there's a lot of Gehrig, both clients of Christy Walsh. When you get to 34, Gowdy has this large, splashy presentation that includes Gehrig making a comment about players on every card. So if you go to the 34 set, you've probably seen that. And I think it shows that he, at least for the locally produced cards, really let them know he was paying attention to what was going on. That whatever it was that Gowdy did in 33, he thought that Ruth and Gehrig and his other clients should be getting a much bigger slice of the pie. And so that by the time you get to this photo here, Diamond Stars Gum, they more or less snuck Ruth into a team photo, that they were unwilling to, as a company that had not signed off with Walsh, they were unwilling to give him an individual card. Because they produced this set split over 3 years, 34, 35, 36. So the fact that they even had this team set in here means they'd already been working on the set for more than a year. And it would have been easy for them to include someone who they really, really wanted to include by this point.
Thank you.
Do you have any idea how much Ruth made from I don't know if there is a typical baseball card appearance. I mean, it sounded as if Christy Walsh viewed this as income for him. Do we know what it was?
I'm going to guess it was in the low thousands of dollars. When Gehrig first signed a deal, he was a hotter commodity, and he provided Walsh, I'm sure, with much broader set of options. Wheaties has Gehrig. Quaker Oats had Ruth. They tried to set up, they being, I think it was Walsh, as well as working with Mrs. Gehrig. They tried to set up Lou as a Hollywood star. There's a fairly distinctive photo, if you haven't seen it before now, where Gehrig is in a Tarzan-like outfit because they were test screening him to be sort of a Tarzan-like figure where you wouldn't have to do too much that was smart or that was emotive and yet still deliver fans what they wanted kind of on screen. I'd say that Ruth, I mean, he heads and shoulders above Gehrig in his ability to entertain the people around him. I think Gehrig really did have trouble in that regard. So by the time you got to the point where they knew they could create bubblegum cards that were starring these bigger people, he was able to get more out of Ruth in cross promotion, other things that weren't the bubblegum companies, because those other companies were selling things for more than a penny. I think the fact that gum was selling for a penny at a time was really something that limited Ruth's appearances.
And I believe Christy Walsh was really the first real agent of a athlete at all, I believe. And he was always looking for these. He was getting Ruth on everything, and way ahead of his time. So it makes sense when you say a couple $1,000s back in the 20s. That's probably right.
Yeah, that's my impression, is that the deals were defined. They had a certain amount of money attached to them. And once the word got out that Walsh was paying attention to those kind of deals and wanted to sign for them, companies more or less self-selected whether they wanted to be involved or not.
Okay. Any other questions?
Great. Thanks very much.
Hearing none, I guess, yeah, thanks to both our speakers. This was very, very interesting and very informative. And thank you both for making the time to share your expertise with us. And again, we'll be back in touch, Boston chapter, on the September 22nd event, which will be 8 p.m. The Zoom hangout. Hopefully, we'll still have a pennant race to talk about. And I think that about sums it up. So I guess say good night and thank you all for taking part. Good to see you.
Very good.